The first time I heard her combat name spoken aloud, 300 trained soldiers went silent at once, and I watched a 4-star general's hands begin to shake. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why a name could do that, you have to understand who we all thought she was. And to understand that, you have to understand who I was, and how badly I misjudged her, and how long it took me to learn that the quietest person in the room is sometimes quiet because they've already seen the thing the rest of you are still pretending isn't coming. My name is Vrenik, Soul of the Ridge, and when this story begins I was an insufferable young fool. I'll say that plainly because it's the truth, and the truth is the only thing that makes the rest worth telling. I am Cass. We are a reptilian people, ridge-backed, sharp of tooth, and we are, I'll be honest about my own kind, obsessed with rank. It's in everything we do. Our names carry our standing. Our greetings encode our hierarchy. A Cass can tell you, within a heartbeat of meeting another Cass, exactly who outranks whom and by how much, and we arrange our entire lives around climbing. We are good soldiers because of it, and we are difficult people because of it. And at 18 years old, newly admitted to the Joint Defense Academy on the training world of Cadet, I was the most difficult and rank-obsessed of all of them. Let me set the scene for you because the place matters. Cadet is a tide-locked world, one face always to its dim red sun, one face always to the dark. The academy sits on the Terminator, the thin twilight band between the burning day side and the frozen night side, where the temperature is survivable and the wind never, ever stops. That wind is the first thing you learn about Cadet. It blows from the hot side to the cold side in a permanent scream, and it carries grit, and it gets into everything. And after a few weeks you stop hearing it the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat, until something makes it go quiet, and then the silence is the loudest thing in the world. Remember that. The silence on Cadet when it came meant something terrible was happening. The academy trained cadets from a dozen species for the Joint Defense Forces, a coalition military built after the last Great War, the one everyone called the Sundering, though I was a hatchling when it ended and knew it only as history. 12 species learning to fight alongside each other instead of against each other. A noble idea. In practice, it was 300 young soldiers from a dozen proud warrior cultures all crammed onto one wind-blown rock, all convinced their own people were the finest fighters in the galaxy, all sorting each other into a vicious unspoken hierarchy from the first day. I told you the Cass are obsessed with rank. We weren't the only ones. The academy was a pressure cooker of young pride, and pride needs a bottom to look down on as much as it needs a top to climb toward. Let me tell you about the Sundering, just a little, because it sits underneath this whole story like the dark side of Cadet sits underneath the cold. I knew it only as a chapter in our history lessons, a great war, 20 years before, when a power called the Vorth Ascendancy had come out of the deep galactic south and tried to break the young coalition before it could become anything. The Vorth were conquerors in the old style, methodical, vast, and they had nearly won. The coalition had held, barely, at a terrible cost, in a series of battles whose names our instructors made us memorize the way you memorize scripture. Hadar's Reach, the Telon Corridor, the Siege of Maul. We memorized the names and the dates and the broad shapes of the strategy, and we thought of them the way the young always think of their parents' war, as something settled, something over, something that had happened to other people in a grayer and less interesting time than our own. We did not think of the Vorth as a present danger. The Vorth had been beaten. The Vorth had withdrawn into their deep southern dark and signed their treaties and gone quiet. That was history. We were the future. We were so sure of it. I want you to hold the Sundering in the back of your mind, the way I should have and didn't, because the woman sleeping 6 feet from me had not learned it from a history lesson. The cadets sorted themselves fast, the way the young do. At the top of our intake's unspoken hierarchy were the Threll, big, fast-plated insectoids with a genuine and ancient warrior tradition, and they knew it and they let everyone know it. Their leader was a cadet named Taskvor, half again my height, With mandibles he clicked when he was pleased with himself, which was always. Below the threll in our cruel little pecking order came the caste, my people, and I had appointed myself our champion. Below us, the San and the cloud-born Ulmari and the rest, each in their place, each scrabbling for an inch of standing. And at the very bottom, beneath even the bottom, in a category we barely considered cadets at all, the 4 humans. I should tell you about the other 3 because what happened to them matters later. There was Dongan, a broad, quiet man who worked in the academy's machine shops more than he trained, and who the instructors used as free labor for repairs. There was Sete, small and watchful, who I never once heard speak above a murmur. There was Brackett, the youngest of the 4, barely 20, who tried hardest to be liked and was mocked the most cruelly for it. And there was my roommate, Kel. 4 humans, in a school of 300, and we treated all 4 as a single low joke, the way you do when you've decided a whole people don't count. I am not proud of any of it. I'm telling you so you understand the distance I had to travel and how far down I was standing when the travel began. The bottom, as far as most of us were concerned, was the humans. There were only 4 humans in our entire intake, 4 out of 300. Humanity was a minor coalition member, a species that had joined late and stayed quiet, and the stories we had about them were not the Death World terror stories you might expect. Those came later, those came after. The stories we had were dismissive. Humans were soft, we said. Humans were slow. Humans came from somewhere unimportant and had no warrior tradition worth the name, and had only been admitted to the academy as a political courtesy. We said these things with the easy cruelty of the young, and the 4 human cadets heard us say them, and said nothing back, which we took as proof. And of the 4 humans, the one we paid the least attention to was my roommate. The academy paired cadets across species lines on purpose, part of the whole noble idea, forced the proud children of warring peoples to share a room and learn to stand each other. I drew a human. I was furious about it. I had come to Ketheldur to be measured against the finest young warriors of the galaxy, to climb, to prove the standing of my line, and instead I'd been bunked with a soft, slow human from a nothing world. And I let her know, in 100 small ways, exactly how far beneath me I considered her. Her name was Mara Eurostrade Kel. At least, that's the name she gave when she arrived. Cadet Kel, she said, just Kel, and she shook my clawed hand with a soft human one and said it was good to meet me and asked which bunk I preferred. And I took the better bunk without thanking her, and that was the beginning. She was older than the rest of us. I noticed that first, though I didn't think much of it. Most cadets were 18, 19, young, fresh, untested. Kel was older. Not old, but older, maybe 30 by human reckoning, with lines at the corners of her eyes that the rest of us didn't have yet, and gray just starting at her temples. I assumed she was a late admission, someone who'd washed out of a civilian life and come to the academy as a last resort, which only confirmed my contempt. A soft human and an old one, who couldn't even make something of herself the normal way and had to come crawling to a military academy in middle age. I did not, at any point in those first weeks, consider the other thing that would make a human older than her fellow cadets. I did not consider that she might already have been a soldier, that the lines at her eyes might have been put there by something. That a person doesn't always come to a war academy at 30 because they've failed at everything else. Sometimes they come because they have unfinished business with war. There were 100 small things in those first weeks that I noticed and dismissed. I want to lay some of them out for you, because looking back they form a picture so clear I'm ashamed I couldn't read it. The way she sat in any room, always with her back to a wall, always facing the door, always with a clear line to the nearest exit automatically, without seeming to think about it, the way you breathe. The way she ate fast, even when there was no reason to hurry, clearing her tray in a few efficient minutes, the way a person eats who has known what it is not to know when the next meal is coming. The way she never, Ever let anyone walk directly behind her without shifting just slightly so she could keep them in the edge of her vision? The way that when a tray dropped in the mess hall one morning, just a clatter, just a cadet's clumsiness, the whole room flinched at the noise, and Kel didn't flinch at all. She was already moving. She was up and turned toward the sound with her hands open before the tray had finished falling, and when she saw it was nothing she sat back down slowly, and her hands were shaking just a little, and she put them in her lap so no one would see, and she finished her meal. I saw that. I saw all of it. And I thought, how strange she is. I never once thought how frightened she is and of what and why. She kept her side of the room very neat, very spare, almost empty, just a bunk and a footlocker and one small object she kept on the shelf above her pillow, a smooth gray stone with something scratched into it that I never got close enough to read. I asked her about it once early, not out of kindness, but out of the idle cruelty of someone looking for a weakness to poke. I said something like, "What's that, a good luck charm? Do humans need luck?" And she looked at the stone for a long moment, and then she looked at me and she said very simply, "It's a name." And nothing else. And something in the way she said it closed the subject so completely that even I, 18 and cruel and looking for a wound to press, did not press it. It's a name. I didn't ask whose. I wish I had. I would understand so much sooner if I had. She slept lightly. I noticed that too. Any sound in the night and she was awake instantly, eyes open, completely still, listening. And then when she'd identified the sound as nothing, she'd settle again. But it took her a long time to settle, longer than it should. And some nights I'd wake to find her sitting up in the dark, very still, just breathing, the way you breathe when you're making yourself breathe. When the breathing isn't automatic anymore and you have to do it on purpose to keep something at bay. I didn't understand it then. I thought she was strange. I know now what I was looking at. I was looking at a soldier who had come home from a war and not all the way back. One night early on, I woke to one of those sessions and I was annoyed. I had a drill in the morning and her quiet breathing in the dark had pulled me out of sleep, and I said something sharp. I don't remember exactly what, something about how some of us were trying to rest and not everyone could afford to be tired and slow. And Kel didn't snap back. She didn't defend herself. She just said into the dark in a level, quiet voice, "Sorry, bad dreams. Go back to sleep, Vrenik." And she said my name. My whole life Cass have used names as weapons, as ranks, as ways of putting each other in their place. And she used my name like it was just my name, like it was a small kind thing to hand a roommate in the dark, and I rolled over and went back to sleep and felt, for just a moment before sleep took me, a flicker of something I didn't have a word for and didn't want. Shame, maybe. The first faint flicker of it. I crushed it. I went asleep certain of my own superiority, but it had flickered. I want that on the record. Even then, some part of me knew. In training, she was unremarkable. That's what cemented my contempt. The academy ran us hard, combat drills, tactical simulations, weapons, survival exercises out in the screaming wind, and in all of it Kel was middling. Not bad, never bad, but never exceptional. She finished her runs in the middle of the pack. She scored adequately on the ranges. She did her simulations competently and without flair. The instructors barely noticed her. The other cadets ranked her near the bottom, an old soft human plodding through the program, and I, sharing her room, ranked her lower than anyone. And here is the thing I didn't see, the thing that took me far too long to understand. She was holding back. Every single day, in every single exercise, Cadet Kel was deliberately, carefully, precisely holding herself to the middle of the pack. She was a woman who knew exactly how fast she could run and chose to run slower, who knew exactly how well she could shoot and chose to score average, who knew exactly what she was capable of and spent every day of those months at the academy meticulously, exhaustingly hiding it. I thought she was mediocre. She was the most disciplined person I have ever known, and the discipline was aimed entirely at not being seen. There was an instructor who almost caught her. I think about him sometimes. His name was Master of Arms Koruth, an old San who had actually fought in the Sundering, one of the few veterans on the academy staff, and the San live long and forget nothing. And there was a slowness to Koruth that the young cadets mistook for weakness, and that I came to understand much later, was the slowness of a person who has seen enough that very little needs to be hurried. Koruth ran our marksmanship. And one afternoon, watching Kel shoot her careful average scores, he stopped behind her and watched her for a long time, longer than he watched anyone, and I saw him frown, not at her failures but at something else, something in the shape of how she held the weapon, the economy of it, the way her body knew the rifle the way only long years know a thing. He didn't say anything. But after the session he kept her back and I lingered to eavesdrop, and I heard him say quietly, "Cadet Kel, you shoot like someone unlearning a habit. Where did you learn to stand like that?" And Kel went very still, and then she said in her level quiet voice, "Hunting, sir, back home, just hunting." And old Koruth looked at her for a long moment with his slow San eyes, and I had the strangest feeling that he did not believe her and had decided, for reasons of his own, to let the lie stand. He said only, "Well, you can stop unlearning it, you'll need it." And he let her go. I didn't understand that either. You'll need it. He knew. I think Koruth knew or half knew and kept her secret because an old soldier recognizes another and grants them the dignity of their silence. I caught a glimpse of it myself once early and didn't understand. We were doing a reaction drill, targets that lit up at random. You had to identify threat from non-threat and respond, a test of speed and judgment. Kel was plodding through it at her usual middling pace, and then one of the other cadets, the big arrogant Threll task force, knocked into her on purpose, the kind of casual cruelty the strong show the weak, trying to make the old human stumble. And for just a fraction of a second before she caught herself, Kel moved. I have spent years trying to describe what I saw in that fraction of a second, and I still can't do it justice. She didn't fall. She should have fallen. The Threll hit her hard, off balance, mid-stride, but her body simply corrected, faster than thought. Faster than any cadet at that academy could have managed, faster than I could follow. A tiny, instantaneous redistribution of weight and balance that turned a stumble into nothing, into a non-event. And in the same fraction of a second her eyes did something, swept the room, found every threat and every exit and the Threll's position and mine, all of it, in less time than it takes to blink. And then she caught herself and made herself stumble deliberately. A fake stumble to replace the real one she just prevented. And she went down on one knee and looked appropriately clumsy, and the Threll laughed, and the moment was over. She'd hidden it. She'd had a flash of something extraordinary and immediately, instinctively, covered it with a performance of weakness. And I'd seen the flash, and I didn't understand it, and I filed it away as a trick of the light, because everything I believed about humans and about this soft, old roommate of mine had no room in it for what I'd actually witnessed. There was one more thing, and it's the thing I should have understood and didn't, and it's the cruelest of all of them because it was kindness and I read it as weakness. The youngest human, bracket, the one who tried so hard to be liked. The other cadets broke him down slowly, over those months, the way a pack breaks down the weakest of a rival group. Mockery, then exclusion, then small cruelties that escalated because no one stopped them. And one night Brackett didn't come back to his quarters, and there was a quiet panic, and it was Kel who found him, out on the cold edge of the Terminator where the wind screams loudest, sitting in the dark where a person goes when they've decided the cold might be easier than another day. I don't know what she said to him out there. She never told me. But she brought him back, and she sat with him for 3 nights running, and after that the two of them were quiet together in a way that I, in my contempt, read as 2 losers consoling each other. I know now what I was looking at. I was looking at a veteran who had learned, in some war I couldn't imagine, exactly what it costs to lose the people next to you, and who had decided that she was not going to lose one more, not even a cadet she barely knew, not even on a safe training world where nothing was supposed to be at stake. She had brought a drowning boy back from the cold edge of the world because that was simply bone deep what she was, and I thought she was weak. Stars, forgive me, I thought that was weakness. What I'd witnessed was a predator pretending to be prey, a veteran pretending to be a novice, Someone who had survived things that put gray in her hair and made her breathe on purpose in the dark, choosing, every day, for reasons I didn't yet understand, to be no one, to be just another cadet, to be overlooked. I would find out why. We all would. It took a real attack on Ketheldur, not a drill, not a simulation, the real thing, the thing her body had been braced for every night while she sat up breathing in the dark to make Cadet Kell stop hiding. And when she stopped, when she finally let the galaxy see what had been sharing my room all those months, the first sign of it was not anything she did. It was her name, her real name, her combat name, coming across the airwaves in the panicked voice of an enemy who recognized it, and the 300 trained soldiers around me going silent all at once, and the wind, for the first time since I'd arrived on that wind-blown world, seeming to go silent too. But that's the end. Let me tell you how we got there. Let me tell you about the months before, and the night the sky over Ketheldur filled with ships that should not have been there, and the soft old roommate I was so sure I was better than. The attack came on an ordinary night, which is how these things always come, not the dramatic ones in the simulations, where alarms blare and a calm voice announces the enemy's approach with plenty of warning. The real thing came while 300 cadets were asleep, while I was asleep, on a night exactly like every other night, with the wind screaming its endless scream across the Terminator and the dim red sun sitting motionless on the horizon where it always sat. There was no warning. That was the first lesson the Vorth taught us about real war, and they taught it before I'd even woken up. Real war does not announce itself. It is simply there, suddenly, in the middle of a night you thought was safe. I woke because Kell was already awake. That's the detail I keep returning to. I didn't wake to alarms. The alarms came later, too late. I woke because some animal part of me registered that my roommate was up, was moving, in a way that was different from her usual nighttime stillness. She wasn't sitting up breathing in the dark. She was at the window, completely motionless, and she was looking up, and the line of her body was wrong, was charged, was the line of an animal that has heard the thing it has spent its whole life listening for. I propped myself up, annoyed, ready to say something cruel about humans who couldn't sleep, and then I saw her face in the dim red light, and the words died in my throat. She wasn't afraid, that was the thing. I had seen her afraid in small ways all those months, the dropped tray, the breathing in the dark. This was not that. Her face had gone perfectly calm, perfectly still, emptied of everything except a terrible focused attention, and she said, without turning around, in a voice I had never heard her use, a voice with no softness in it at all. "Vrenik, get up, get dressed now." Quietly. And I, who had spent months treating this woman as beneath me, who had taken the better bunk and the larger share and the right to be cruel, I got up and I got dressed, and I did it quietly, and I did not ask why, because the voice did not allow questions. The voice was not asking. I understand now that I was hearing, for the first time, the voice she used to use. The command voice. The one that had been buried under Cadet Kell for however many months, and that came up out of her, fully formed, the instant the night went wrong. "What is it?" I whispered, pulling on my boots. "What's happening?" She was still at the window. "Ships," she said, "high up. No running lights, no transponders, dropping fast through the upper atmosphere on the night side, using the dark side to mask their descent." A pause. That's not how anyone arrives who wants to be seen. That's how you arrive when you want to already be on the ground before anyone knows you're coming. Another pause, and then, very quietly, almost to herself, in a tone that made the scales on my ridge stand up, "I know that approach. I've seen that approach before." And then the sky lit up. I have tried many times to describe that first strike to people who weren't there, and I always fail, because there's no frame of reference for it if you haven't lived it. The Academy's perimeter defenses, the automated batteries that ringed the Terminator base, that we'd been told were more than adequate, that we'd never once thought about. They came online and fired and were gone, all in the space of perhaps 4 seconds. I saw the muzzle flashes light the night-side sky, a brief defiant scatter of light, and then I saw them answered, and the answer was not a scatter. The answer was precise, surgical. Every battery the Academy had located and destroyed in a single coordinated volley from the descending ships, before a single one of them could fire a second shot. It was the most violent thing I had ever seen, and it was also, somehow, the most controlled. This was not a raid. A raid is chaos. This was a professional military, removing the only teeth a target had, methodically in the dark, and the precision of it was its own kind of terror, because it told you that the people doing it had done it many times before and were very, very good at it. The alarm started then, far too late. And the calm announcing voice from the simulations did not come, because this was not a simulation, and instead what came over the base address system was a cadet's voice, young and cracking with panic, someone in the operations center who had no business making the announcement and was making it anyway because everyone above them was already dead. Attack, we're under attack. The perimeter is gone. I don't. They're landing troops. This is not a drill, this is. And then nothing, the channel cutting out, and that silence was worse than any words. The base dissolved into chaos. 300 cadets, woken from sleep into a nightmare, pouring out of their quarters into corridors with no orders and no leadership and no idea what was happening. A dozen species worth of panic colliding in the dark. The instructors tried to take control and couldn't. Half the senior staff had been in the command center when the first strike came, and the command center, we'd learn, was the very first thing the enemy had targeted, before even the perimeter guns. They knew where our leadership slept. They knew our layout. This had been planned for a long time by people who had studied us, and they had cut the head off the Academy in the opening seconds. And into that chaos the enemy came. I saw them for the first time in the main assembly hall, where a few hundred of us had clotted together out of the herd instinct that grips frightened young things, packing into the largest space because being alone in the dark corridors was unbearable. The big doors at the far end blew inward, and through the smoke came soldiers, and I knew, the way you know a thing in your gut before your mind catches up, that these were not raiders, not pirates, not the disorganized scum that troubled the edges of coalition space. These were professionals. They moved like one organism, covering each other's angles, sweeping the room with a discipline that our 300 panicking cadets could not have matched on our best day. And they were Vorth. I had only ever seen Vorth in history lessons, tall, gray-skinned, four-armed, with the flat, expressionless faces of a people who had spent their whole history at war. The Sundering's enemy. The conquerors who had been beaten and had withdrawn into the deep south 20 years before. And here they were, on Ketheldur in the assembly hall of a coalition academy, and the impossible truth of it landed on all of us at once. The war was not over. The war had never been over. The Vorth had spent 20 years rebuilding in the dark, and they had come back. And they had chosen to begin by striking a school, a soft target full of the coalition's future officers, to cut the throat of the next generation before it could grow up to oppose them. It was monstrous, and it was brilliant, and it was happening, and we were children, and we were going to die. A Vorth officer stepped forward. You could tell the rank by the markings. Even I could read that much, and raised a device to its throat and spoke, and the device rendered its words into coalition standard, flat and cold, and amplified across the hall. Cadets of the Joint Defense Academy, it said, your defenses are destroyed. Your command is dead. You are surrounded, and you are children, and you are not soldiers, whatever your instructors have told you. There is no help coming. The nearest coalition fleet is 6 days away and does not yet know you are under attack. You have one choice and one only. Surrender now, and you will be taken alive as prisoners as is lawful. Resist, and we will demonstrate on this small and unimportant world exactly what the coalition's future is worth. A pause. You have done nothing to us. You are merely where we have chosen to begin, kneel and live. And 300 cadets, the proud young warriors of a dozen species, the children who had spent months sorting each other into hierarchies of strength, We looked at the Vorth, and we looked at our dead command and our destroyed defenses, and we believed them. Of course we believed them. They were right. We were children. There was no help coming. And one by one, beginning with the Threll, beginning with proud Task Vor who had been so sure of his own ferocity, the cadets of the Joint Defense Academy began, slowly, to kneel. I started to kneel too. I'm not ashamed of it, or rather, I am, but I've made my peace with the shame because I was 18 and terrified, and I believed the cold voice that said there was no help coming, and kneeling seemed like the only path that led to seeing another sunrise. I started to kneel. And a voice behind me said quietly, "Don't." I turned. Kel was standing, in a hall full of kneeling cadets in the face of a professional military that had just gutted our defenses in seconds. My soft, old, middling roommate was standing, perfectly still, perfectly calm, and she was not looking at the Vorth with fear. She was looking at them with recognition, the way you look at someone you used to know. "Kel," I whispered. "Kel, get down, they'll kill you." "They came in 3 waves, she said, not to me, not really, her eyes moving over the Vorth formation with that terrible focused attention. Decapitation strike on the command center, then the perimeter, then the breach. Classic Vorth doctrine. Hasn't changed in 20 years. Same approach vector, same timing, same arrogance." Her voice was very quiet and very level, and it was doing something to the cold knot of fear in my chest, loosening it, because there was no fear in her voice at all, only a kind of grim professional assessment, the sound of someone who has been exactly here before and survived it. "They always do the speech," she murmured. "The Neeland Live speech. They did it at Maul. They did it at Hadar's Reach. They do it because it works, because frightened people want to be told there's a way to live, and they're counting on it working now." Then she looked down at me, kneeling at her feet, and something in her face softened just slightly, just for me. "Vrenik, listen to me. The speech is a lie. The Vorth don't take cadets prisoner. They can't. We're future officers. We're intelligence value and future enemies both. It's not lawful for them to keep us, and it's not safe for them to free us. The taken alive is to get us to kneel quietly so they don't have to fight 300 desperate cadets. Once we're kneeling and disarmed, it becomes a different kind of operation." She paused. "I've seen the room after that operation. I'm not going to let you kneel for it." The cold knot in my chest had become something else. "Then what do we do?" I whispered. "You said there's no help coming. You said the fleet is 6 days. "There's no help coming," Kel agreed. "So we're not going to wait for help." And she reached up to the collar of her cadet uniform, and she did something I didn't understand, pulled a thin chain out from under it, a chain with a small worn tag on it, military issue, the kind of thing a soldier wears, and she looked at it for a moment in the dim emergency light, and I saw her read whatever was scratched into it, the same way she read the gray stone above her bunk on the bad nights. It's a name, she'd told me. And I understood, suddenly, with a lurch, that the name on the stone and the name on the tag and the name she was about to give the enemy were all the same name, and that it was hers, and that she had spent these months keeping it locked away in the dark above her pillow, because saying it out loud was a thing that cost her something I couldn't yet imagine. She let the chain fall back against her chest. And she stepped forward, stepped out from the kneeling rows of cadets, into the open space before the Vorth officer, into every weapon in the room, and she stood there, a single soft human in a coalition cadet's uniform, and the Vorth swung their weapons toward her, and the officer regarded her with its flat, expressionless face, and into that frozen, terrible moment Kel did the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do. She didn't attack, she didn't beg. She simply lifted her chin and looked the Vorth officer in its alien eyes, and she gave it her name. Not Cadet Kel, her other name, the one she'd buried, her combat name. She spoke it clearly into the silence of the assembly hall in a voice that carried to every corner, and I didn't understand it, it was just sounds to me, a human word, a designation. But I understood what happened next, because what happened next needed no translation. The Vorth officer flinched. I saw it. We all saw it. A professional soldier of a conquering people, standing over 300 kneeling children with every advantage in the universe, heard a single human word and flinched, took a half step back, and its weapon, which had been pointed steadily at Kel's chest, dipped, just slightly, the barrel wavering for the first time since they'd breached the hall. And around the room, the other Vorth went still in a new way, a worse way, the stillness of soldiers who have just heard something they were not prepared to hear, and one of them said something to another in their own tongue, low and fast, and the translator on the officer's throat caught a fragment of it and rendered it before the officer could silence it, and the fragment came out across the hall in flat coalition standard, and it was a question, and the question was, "That name, did it say, is that she's supposed to be dead?" And then the radio chatter started. Their command channel, their tactical net. I learned later that Kel had spoken her name not just to the room, but loud enough and clear enough that the Vorth soldiers' own equipment picked it up and relayed it up their chain of command. And across the Vorth battle net, on 100 frequencies at once, the name went out, and the airwaves of Kethel-Dur filled with the sound of a professional army discovering that the person standing in front of them was someone they had a history with, someone they had reason to fear, someone they had believed for 20 years was dead. I didn't know who she was, not yet. But I was watching the effect of who she was ripple outward through the most disciplined soldiers I'd ever seen, watching the conquerors of the Sundering go pale and still at a single human word. And I looked up at my roommate, my soft, old, middling roommate, who finished her runs in the middle of the pack and shot careful average scores and brought drowning boys back from the cold edge of the world. And I understood that I had spent these months sharing a room with a legend, and had been too proud and too foolish to see it. The Vorth officer recovered itself. It had 300 prisoners and a flinching command net and a reputation of its own to protect. It steadied its weapon, and it looked at Kel, and it spoke, and its flat, cold voice was not quite as flat or as cold as it had been. "That name belongs to a ghost," it said. "A story the coalition tells to frighten our recruits. The owner of that name died at the siege of Mal 20 years ago, holding the southern wall. I have seen the casualty records myself." And Kel, standing alone in front of an army, with 300 children kneeling behind her and the airwaves screaming her name across the night, Kel smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the saddest, tiredest, most terrible smile I have ever seen. The smile of someone confronting the exact thing they had spent 20 years and 1,000 sleepless nights trying to leave behind. And she said, "The casualty records are wrong. I held the southern wall at Mal and I didn't die." She let that sit in the silence. Then, "But a lot of people I loved did, and I have spent 20 years not being her because being her costs more than you could ever understand." Her voice didn't break. That was the worst part. It stayed perfectly level. "And you just made me be her again, in a room full of children, so now I'm going to do what she does." She looked around the hall at the Vorth, at the kneeling cadets, at me. "Last chance," she said to the enemy. "Leave this world. Take your ships and go, and tell your command that the southern wall is standing again, and that you found it where you least expected it, in a school in front of children. Go now and live. I'm giving you the speech back. Kneel and live. Only I mean it, and you didn't." The Vorth officer did not leave. Of course it didn't. It couldn't, not in front of its own soldiers, not with its command net listening. It made the choice that pride makes, the choice I would have made at 18, the choice that the proud always make right up until the moment they learn better. It raised its weapon fully and aimed it at the ghost in the cadet's uniform, and it said, "You are one human. You are old and alone and unarmed. A name is not an army." And Kel said, very quietly, "No. But I never needed an army. I just needed you to stop underestimating me long enough to get close." And she moved. But that's the next part. I have to stop here because what happened next happened fast, and it changed all of us who lived through it, and it deserves to be told properly and not rushed. I'll only say this to carry you over. I had spent months believing I understood strength. I was Cass. I came from a people who measured everything by rank and ferocity and the standing of one's line. And in the next 60 seconds, a soft old human who scored in the middle of the pack taught me, and 300 kneeling cadets, and an army of conquerors, that everything we thought we knew about strength was wrong. That the most dangerous person in any room is not the one who shows you their power. It is the one who hides it and grieves it, and prays they will never have to use it again, and then does, without hesitation, the moment a child needs protecting. She moved, and the southern wall stood again. I will try to tell you what she did, but I want to warn you first that my telling will be inadequate, because I was 18 and terrified and kneeling on a cold floor, and the human eye, even the Cass eye, which is faster than a human's, was not built to follow what Kell did in that assembly hall. I have pieced it together over the years from my own fractured memory, and from what the others said, and from the Vorth's own recordings, which the coalition recovered later. But understand that even now, telling it, I am assembling it after the fact. In the moment, it was not a sequence of actions. It was a single, seamless, terrible event, and it was over before my mind had finished forming the thought she's going to die. She did not die, the Vorth did. The officer aimed its weapon at her, and Kell was already not where the weapon was aimed. That's the only way I can describe the start of it. She did not dodge. Dodging implies a movement you can see, a flinch sideways. She simply was. In the instant the officer's finger tightened, standing in a different place, half a step inside the weapon's line, too close for it to track, and her hands were on it. And the shot went into the ceiling. And then the weapon was hers, and the officer was falling, and she had not stopped moving. She was already turning toward the next one. Here is the thing I understood watching it, the thing that rearranged my entire understanding of the universe. The Vorth were not slow. The Vorth were the finest soldiers I had ever seen, professionals, conquerors, and they reacted as fast as any soldiers could react. They brought their weapons around, they tried to track her. They fought back with everything their training gave them. It made no difference. It was like watching water try to fight a stone, or rather, no, it was the opposite. It was like watching stones try to fight water, because the Vorth were the rigid disciplined thing and Kell was the thing that flowed between them, around them, through the gaps in their formation that they didn't know they had, and every place she flowed, a Vorth fell. And she was never where their weapons were and always where their weakness was. And she did it without apparent effort, without flourish, with a horrible economy that wasted nothing. No motion, no force, no time. I told you in the beginning what I'd taught about humans for 40 years. No, I'm a teacher's age now, but back then I was a cadet, and I hadn't taught anything. I'd only learned the lessons wrong. We were told humans were endurance predators, pursuit hunters, the thing that follows and never stops. We thought that meant they were slow. We had it exactly backwards. The endurance is not instead of speed. The endurance is underneath the speed. A human can move that fast and keep moving that fast, longer than anything has any right to, because the whole architecture of them, every muscle and nerve and stubborn cell, was built on a world that demanded both at once. Kell did not move like a sprinter who would tire. She moved like something that would still be moving, at exactly that speed, with exactly that precision, long after every Vorth in the room was down. And the Vorth, watching their officer fall and their soldiers fall, understood it too, and I saw the discipline start to crack, saw the conquerors of the Sundering begin, for the first time in their proud history, to be afraid. But here's what I need you to understand, because it's the whole heart of why this story matters, why I'm still telling it, why I weep a little every time I reach this part. She was not enjoying it. I have seen Cass warriors in the joy of battle, the red exultation that takes my people when we fight, and there was none of that in Kell. None. Her face in the middle of all that violence was not exultant. It was grieving. It was the face of someone doing a thing they hate, a thing they have done before and prayed never to do again, a thing that costs them a piece of themselves with every Vorth that falls. She moved through that hall like an executioner who weeps, and the weeping was not weakness. The weeping was the whole point. She had spent 20 years not being this, because being this hurt her in a place that didn't heal, and she had chosen, in front of 300 children, to tear that wound back open and bleed so that we could live. And she did not kill all of them. I have to say that because it matters as much as everything else. There came a moment, maybe 20 seconds in, maybe 30, time had no meaning, when the Vorth broke. When the survivors, perhaps half their number, stopped trying to fight her and simply tried to flee, scrambling back toward the breached doors, their discipline finally and completely shattered by a single human ghost. And Kel let them go. She stopped. In the middle of it, with the enemy in flight and her hands free and the killing not finished, she stopped, and she let the broken Vorth run, and she stood in the center of that hall, breathing hard for the first time, surrounded by the fallen, and she did not pursue. I learned later why. I asked her after, when I finally understood enough to ask anything, and she said, "I'll get to it, I'll get to the after," but she said something then about the difference between the wall and the sword. She said the wall holds. The wall stops the thing from getting to the people behind it, but the wall doesn't chase. The moment you start chasing, she said, the moment you go from stopping them to hunting them, you've stopped being the wall and started being something else. And she'd seen what people become when they cross that line in the war in herself, and she had promised herself, on the southern wall at Mal with everyone she loved dying around her, that she would only ever be the wall. Never the sword, never the hunter. Just the thing that stands between and holds, and lets the broken enemy run when the running means the children are safe. She let them run. And the ones who ran carried the story with them, up their command net, across the airwaves of Cadet. The southern wall is real. The ghost of Mal is real. She's here, she's in the school, run. And that story did more than her hands ever could have. Because the Vorth had not come to Cadet with one squad. They had come with a fleet, with hundreds of soldiers, with the strength to take the whole academy and 20 more like it. And the squad in that assembly hall was only the first of many that should have poured in to crush us. But the squad in that assembly hall broke and ran, and screamed her name across every Vorth frequency and the rest of the invasion force. The hundreds we never saw, the ships still landing troops, the soldiers fanning out across the base. They heard it. And they hesitated. That was the gift she gave us, not the dead Vorth in the assembly hall, though those mattered. The hesitation. The whole Vorth invasion of Cadet faltered, for long minutes that stretched into the better part of an hour, because their command could not make sense of what their soldiers were screaming, because they had come to slaughter children and had run into a thing out of their own nightmares, a ghost from the war they thought they'd have one, and they did not know how many more like her might be waiting in the dark corridors of this school they had thought was soft. One human had become, in the panic telling and retelling across their net, an unknown number of humans, a trap, an ambush, the coalition's secret weapon hidden in plain sight on a training world. The Vorth were professionals, and professionals faced with the unknown slow down. They consolidate. They wait for clarity. They stop pouring troops into what might be a kill box. And that hour of hesitation was the only thing in the universe that could have saved us. Because it turned out there was help coming after all, and it was closer than Kel had thought. Old Koruth, the master of arms, the San veteran who had half recognized Kel at the firing range, Koruth had survived the decapitation strike. He had been in the lower levels when the command center died, and while the rest of us were being herded into the assembly hall, the old San had made his slow, patient way to the academy's auxiliary communications array. The backup the Vorth hadn't known to target because it was old and small and not on any standard schematic, and he had spent those long minutes doing the one thing a veteran does when the situation is hopeless. He refused to accept that it was. He got a signal out. A narrow, desperate, single-burst distress call, aimed not at the main coalition fleet 6 days away, but at a single patrol cruiser that Koruth happened to know was running exercises 2 systems over. A cruiser he knew was there because he was an old soldier who kept track of such things, who never stopped keeping track, even in peacetime, even on a quiet posting at a training school, because some part of him had never believed the war was truly over either. The cruiser was 9 hours out at emergency burn. 9 hours, not 6 days, 9 hours. And the only reason 9 hours was enough, the only reason any of us are alive to remember this, is that, for the first hour of those 9, the fourth invasion of Cadet sat frozen and confused and afraid, hesitating in the dark, because one grieving human had made them remember a wall they thought they'd torn down 20 years ago. But the hesitation didn't last forever. That's the thing about buying time with fear. The fear wears off, and the professionals reassert their discipline, and the fourth command, after that first terrible hour, began to understand that whatever was in the assembly hall, it was one thing, not an army, and they began to move again. And Kel knew they would. She knew it before any of us. She stood in that hall full of fallen Vorth, breathing hard, with 300 cadets staring at her in a silence deeper than any I'd ever known, and she did not waste a single second on the awe she'd earned. She turned to us, to the kneeling children who had treated her, all of us, as beneath them, and the command voice came out of her again, level and absolute. "On your feet," she said, "all of you. The ones who ran will be back with friends and with orders, and next time they won't walk into a room blind. We have maybe 40 minutes before they organize a real assault, and we are not going to be here when it comes." She was already moving, picking up Vorth weapons, distributing them into shaking cadet hands. "Listen to me. You are not children anymore. The Vorth took that from you tonight, and I'm sorry, I am so sorry, but it's gone and we can't get it back, and what's left is this. You are soldiers now, the youngest soldiers in this war, and we are going to act like it. There is help coming." And here she looked toward the corridor that led to the auxiliary array, and I swear she knew, somehow, what Koruth had done or guessed it. But it is hours away, and our job, the only job that matters, is to still be alive when it arrives. And Task Force, the proud Threll who had been first to kneel, stood up off the floor and looked at the human he'd shoved in the reaction drill, the human he'd mocked for months, and he clicked his mandibles. A Threll gesture I learned later of the deepest respect, one they almost never give, and he said, "What are your orders?" "What are your orders?" The proudest cadet in our intake, asking a soft old human for orders. And I understood that the hierarchy I had spent my whole life believing in, the ranks and the standing and the careful sorting of who was above whom, had just been revealed as the childish thing it always was. There was only one rank that had ever mattered. It was the rank of the person who stands between the children and the dark, and refuses to move, and Kel had held it her whole life, in secret, in grief, in the middle of the pack where none of us thought to look. She gave us our orders, and we, 300 cadets of a dozen proud species, finally, did the thing the Academy had been built to teach us, the thing all our rivalries and rankings had kept us from. We became one force, under her. But the night was not over. The Vorth came back, as she'd said they would, in force and in fury and no longer afraid, with orders to kill the ghost and everyone with her. And what happened in those last hours before the cruiser arrived? The defense of the Academy, the cost of it, what it took from Kel and from all of us, and the thing she did at the very end that I have never been able to speak of without stopping. That is the last part of the story. I'll tell you the end. I owe it to her to tell it right. But you should know, before I do, that not all of us walked out of Cadet, and that the one we lost was not the one any of us would have chosen, and was the only one she could not save, and was the reason her hands shook at the very end when the general finally saluted her. We held the Academy for 8 hours and 40 minutes. I know the number exactly because someone kept count, and because in the years since I have measured my whole life against those 8 hours and 40 minutes, the way you measure everything that comes after against the one night you became who you were going to be. I won't pretend to give you a soldier's account of the defense, because I was not a soldier yet, not really. I was a frightened cast cadet doing what the human told me, and most of what I remember is fragments. The choke point Kel chose. She pulled us back from the open assembly hall into the deep core of the Academy, the engineering levels, where the corridors were narrow and the angles were ours, and the Vorth's numbers couldn't be brought to bear all at once. She walked those corridors before the assault came, and she saw things in them I couldn't see. Lines of fire and fallback positions in places where a handful could hold against many. And she placed us the way you place stones in a wall, each cadet where their particular strength mattered. The Threll's heavy plating at the front of the gaps, the small quick ulmery high in the ceiling spaces as spotters, my own people in the middle ranks where Cass' ferocity could plug a breach. She had a use for every species' nature. She had spent months watching us, I realized. All those middling exercises where she seemed to barely notice anything. She had been learning every one of us, what we could do, where we'd break, and now she spent that knowledge like a master spending a hoarded fortune. And she fought beside us the whole time. That's the thing about Kel that I want to carve into stone, that I did carve into stone later on the memorial. She did not command from the rear. She did not spend us and stand safe. She was at every breach, in every worst moment, the wall within the wall, and when a position was about to fall she was simply there, flowing into the gap the way she'd flowed through the assembly hall, and the gap would hold. Hour after hour. The Vorth threw everything at us. They had the numbers, they had the weapons, they had the fury of a proud army humiliated by a ghost and a pack of children. And we held, because she would not let us do otherwise, because every time one of us was ready to break she was there, level and calm and certain, saying, "Hold, just hold, help is coming, hold the wall." It cost, I won't soften it, cadets died in those corridors. Young soldiers of a dozen species who had been alive and arrogant and full of their own importance the morning before, and who spent the last of themselves holding a line for the people beside them. And some of them I had mocked, and some of them had mocked me. And in the dark of the engineering levels none of that meant anything anymore. There was only the wall and the people holding it, and the ones who fell holding it. I held a dying San cadet in the 7th hour, a slow, patient boy I'd never bothered to learn the name of, and I learned his name then, as he asked me to tell his clutch mother he hadn't run, and I promised him, and he believed me, and he died believing it, and I have kept that promise. I found her, I told her, he didn't run. None of them ran. That was Kel's doing too. She made it so that not one of us ran, not because we weren't afraid, but because she had shown us, with her own grieving body, what it looked like to be afraid and hold anyway. And in the 8th hour, the one we lost was Brackett. I told you about Brackett, the youngest human, the one who tried so hard to be liked, the one Kel had pulled back from the cold edge of the world on those 3 sleepless nights. He held a position in the engineering levels with a handful of others, and it was a good position, and he held it well. The boy who'd nearly given up on himself months before fought like he had finally found a reason to live, which is the cruelest thing, that he found it, and then it was taken. A Vorth breach came through a maintenance shaft no one had known about, behind his position, and Brackett saw it before anyone, saw it coming for the cadets beside him. And he did exactly what Kel had taught all of us by example. He became the wall. He put his body in the gap. He held the breach alone long enough for the others to fall back and seal it, and he did not survive the holding. And when Kel reached the spot, she was always reaching the spot, she was everywhere. It was already too late, and she knelt over the boy she had saved from the cold and could not save from this. And for the first and only time that whole night, the wall cracked. She made a sound, I heard it. A small broken sound, just one, torn out of her over Brackett's body, and then she pressed it back down, forced it back behind the level calm, because there were still 300 others to hold, and a war doesn't pause for grief, and she stood up, and her hands were shaking, and she went back to the wall. But I had seen it. I had seen what it cost her, what all of it cost her, the thing I'd been too proud to understand for months. That being the strongest person in the room is not a gift. It is a sentence, because it means you are the one who has to watch everyone you couldn't reach in time, over and over, for the rest of your life. And Kel had been carrying 20 years of that before she ever came to Kethel Dur, and now she was carrying Brackett too. And she carried it back to the wall and held the line with shaking hands because that is what the wall does. It holds, even when it's breaking, especially then. The cruiser arrived in the 9th hour. It came down through the night-side sky the way the Vorth had come, but loud, every light blazing, transponders screaming coalition identification across every frequency, the opposite of a sneak attack, a declaration. The patrol cruiser Indomitable, 2 systems over on exercises, redirected by one old Sans narrow desperate distress call, 9 hours at emergency burn, and it came down over the academy with its guns hot and its Marines already dropping, and the Vorth, who had spent 8 hours failing to break 300 children led by a ghost, did the math that real soldiers do, the math of a fight no longer worth the cost, and they broke off. They withdrew to their ships and they lifted off Ketheldur and they fled into the deep south they'd come from, carrying with them the story that would spread across the whole front in the months to come. That the coalition's training worlds were not soft, that the ghost of Maul was alive, that the southern wall still stood. The first battle of the new war, the war the Vorth had meant to open with an easy slaughter of children, instead became the place where they learned that the coalition's next generation had been forged, in a single night, by the very person they believed they killed 20 years before. We had held. Against everything, against all sense, against an army we had held, and the help that wasn't coming had come, and the sun that never moved still sat on the horizon where it always sat, red and dim and somehow, now, beautiful. The general came 2 days later with the relief force. A 4-star, an old Cass as it happened, of a line whose standing would have made the 18-year-old version of me dizzy with deference. He came to honor the defenders of Ketheldur, and there was a formation in the assembly hall where it had all begun, 300 cadets minus the ones we'd lost, and the general walked the line, and we stood at attention, and then he reached Kel. And he stopped. He had been told by then who she was. The records had been checked, the name confirmed, the impossible truth established, that the holder of a combat name from the Sundering, a soldier listed as killed in action at the siege of Maul 20 years before, had been living quietly as a middling cadet on a training world, and had stood up alone in front of an army to hold the wall one more time. The general knew all of it when he reached her. And this 4-star general, this old Cass of the highest line, the most senior officer most of us would ever stand near, he stopped in front of my soft old roommate, and his hands began to shake. I watched it happen. The same hands that had pinned medals on heroes that had commanded fleets, shaking like a young cadet's, and the general's voice was not steady when he spoke, and what he said was not a commendation or an order or anything from the formal language of the military. What he said was, I was at Maul. I was 19. I was on the southern wall when it fell, and you, and his voice broke, the way Kel's had broken over Brackett. You put me in a supply skiff, and you sealed the hatch, and you told me to live, and you went back to the wall, and the wall fell, and they told us all you died. Every year on the day Maul fell, I have remembered the cadet who sealed me in that skiff. For 20 years. And he straightened this old general, and he brought his clawed hand up in the sharpest salute I have ever seen, and he held it, trembling, and 300 of us followed him, and the whole assembly hall saluted the ghost, and Kel stood there and led us, because there was nothing else she could do. And her hands were shaking too, not from fear. I knew by then what her shaking hands meant. They were shaking because saluting her meant making her be the legend again, fully in front of everyone, the thing she had spent 20 years hiding from, and because somewhere behind the formation lay the one she hadn't saved, the San boy and the others, and Brackett, always Brackett, the one she'd pulled back from the cold and lost to the breach. The general saw her hands shake. He was a soldier, he understood. He lowered his salute and he stepped close and he said quietly, just for her, though I was near enough to hear, you don't have to be her anymore. You held the wall, you held it twice. You can put it down now. And Kel looked at him, and she shook her head slowly, And she said the thing that I have built the rest of my life around, the thing I tell the cadets now in my own old age, when I teach them what strength actually is. She said, "No, you never get to put it down. That's the whole secret, the thing they don't tell you. The ones who can hold the wall are the ones who never get to stop holding it, because the moment you put it down is the moment it falls on someone who couldn't carry it. So you carry it. You carry it tired, and you carry it grieving, and you carry it when your hands shake, and you carry it in the middle of the pack where no one's looking, so that when the night comes, and the night always comes, you're already standing where you need to be." She looked down the formation at all of us, 300 children she'd turned into a wall in a single night. "I came here to teach, not officially. I came here because I'm old and tired, and I thought maybe, if I couldn't put it down, I could at least hand it to someone, quietly, one at a time, teach a few of them to hold the wall before they ever found out how heavy it was." Her eyes found me in the line and stopped. "I didn't expect to have to show them this fast. I'm sorry, Vrenik. You were supposed to have more time to be young. I think about that still. You were supposed to have more time to be young." She grieved that for us, even then, even covered in the cost of the longest night of all our lives. She grieved that the universe had made us soldiers before we'd finished being children, the same grief she carried for herself, the same grief that had put gray in her hair and made her breathe on purpose in the dark. She stayed at the academy after that. They offered her rank, command, a return to everything she'd given up, and she refused all of it. She asked only to keep teaching. And the academy, in its wisdom, let her. Let the ghost of Mal spend her remaining years as an instructor on a quiet, wind-blown world, handing the wall to the young, one at a time, the way she'd planned before the night that wouldn't wait. I was in her first official class. I was a different caste by then. The rank-obsessed fool who'd taken the better bunk was gone, burned out of me in 8 hours and 40 minutes in the engineering levels. And what was left was someone who finally understood what his soft old roommate had been trying to show him all along. She's gone now. Humans don't live as long as Cass, and the years she'd spent being the wall had cost her more than years, and she went, in the end, quietly in her sleep on the world where she'd chosen to lay down the only thing she'd ever let herself lay down, which was her loneliness. The whole academy stood for her. Generals came. The ones she'd saved at Mal who still lived came. And I keep on a shelf above my own bunk now, a smooth gray stone with a name scratched into it. Her name. Her real one, the combat name, the one that echoed across the airwaves of Ketheldur and made an army afraid. She gave it to me, near the end. She said someone should carry it who understood what it cost. They thought she was just another cadet. Old, soft, middling, sleeping 6 feet from me, finishing her runs in the middle of the pack. And she let us think it, because the strongest among us almost always do. They hide in the middle of the pack, carrying a weight you can't see, praying the night won't come, ready for it when it does. The night came, and the wall stood. It's standing still. She handed it to us, one at a time, and not one of us, not while we live, will ever let it fall.